Hey there, tonight we're stepping into a story where strength was never the question, only time. This is a tale shaped by prophecy, by quiet choices that narrowed the world one step at a time, until only a single path remained. It's not a story of sudden endings, but of a life lived knowing exactly how it would conclude, and walking forward anyway. If these slow, ancient stories help your thoughts settle, or your breathing soften, you're welcome to like the video, subscribe to the channel, or leave a comment, maybe where you're listening from, or what hour the night has reached for you, only if it feels peaceful. Now let the weight of the day fall away, and drift with me back to a world of heroes and gods, where glory burned bright, but briefly, and where fate did not shout, it simply closed its hands. This is the story of Achilles, and the moment when destiny finally tightened its grip, in the shadowed cradle of the gods' design, where the river Styx murmured its eternal vow. A child was born under the weight of prophecy. The waters lapped at his skin, cold and unyielding, as his mother, Thetis, gripped his heel and dipped him into the current. Not a cry escaped him, not then. Not in that first brush with immortality's edge. The river's touch rendered him invulnerable, save for that fragile hold. A silent promise of fragility amid strength. But prophecies are not gifts, they are chains forged in the stars. And this one whispered of choices yet unmade, paths that would converge into a single, unalterable thread. The boy grew in the folds of Mount Pelion, where centaurs roamed like guardians of forgotten wisdom. Chiron, the wise one, half man, half beast, took him under his tutelage. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and Achilles learned the art of the hunt not as sport, but as ritual. His feet moved silently over moss-covered stones, his bow drawn with a patience that belied his youth. Each arrow released was a breath held, a moment suspended between intent and consequence. Chiron taught him the stars' alignments, the herbs that healed or harmed, and the songs of heroes long faded into myth. Fate is a river, the centaur would say, his voice rumbling like distant thunder, but you are the vessel that navigates its bends. Achilles listened, his eyes reflecting the firelight, but in his heart a restlessness stirred, like a wolf pacing its den, sensing the hunt's call. Years unfolded slowly, like scrolls unrolling in a temple archive. Achilles' body hardened under the sun's gaze, muscles coiling like ropes on a ship's deck. He raced the wind across meadows, his laughter echoing against cliffs, but always the prophecy lingered in the shadows. Thetis had foreseen it, a life of glory, brief as a shooting star, or obscurity stretched long like twilight shadows. She sought to bend fate's arc, hiding him among the daughters of king, Lycomaids on Skyros. Dressed in women's robes, he wove threads at the loom, his hands, calloused from spear and sword, now feigning delicacy. The girls whispered of his strangeness, his gaze too fierce for their gentle world, but he endured, a lion cloaked in lamb's wool. Silence became his companion, the weight of disguise pressing like armour too tight. Yet fate does not abide hiding. Odysseus, cunning as the fox, arrived with gifts, jewels and fabrics for the maidens, but among them a sword gleaming with promise. The girls cooed over trinkets, but Achilles' hand reached instinctively for the blade, his fingers curling around its hilt as if reuniting with a lost limb. A trumpet blared a false alarm of attack, and while others fled in fear, he stood ready, the warrior unveiled. The choice flickered then, subtle as a flame in wind. Remain concealed, embrace the long life of peace, or step into the light where glory beckoned. Odysseus' smile was knowing, his words soft but insistent. The world calls, son of Peleus. Will you answer? Achilles' eyes met the sea beyond the window, waves crashing with inevitable rhythm, and in that gaze, a path began to narrow. He sailed for Troy, the ships cutting through foam like knives through flesh. The Myrmidons followed, their oars dipping in unison, a heartbeat echoing across the Aegean. Achilles stood at the prow, wind tangling his hair, the salt air filling his lungs. No fanfare marked his departure. It was a quiet yielding to duty, the first link in the chain. The beaches of Troy loomed, walls rising defiant under Hector's watch. Agamemnon's army swelled, kings and warriors bound by oath, but Achilles felt the pull of something deeper. Honour, yes, but also the thrill of testing fate's boundaries. Landfall came at dawn, the sand cool underfoot as they dragged boats ashore. Tents rose like mushrooms after rain. Fires kindled against the chill. He sharpened his spear, the scrape of stone on metal a meditative chant, each stroke affirming his presence in this theatre of war. Battles began as skirmishes, testing the waters of enmity. Achilles moved through them like a shadow, his sword an extension of will. Enemies fell not with cries of triumph, but in the hush of inevitability, a thrust here, a parry there, bodies crumpling to earth as leaves in autumn. His armour gleamed, forged by Hephaestus himself. But it was his speed that defined him, feet swift as Hermes' wings. Companions marvelled, Patroclus most of all, his friend and shadow, eyes following Achilles, with a loyalty deeper than blood. They shared wine by firelight, stories unfolding in low tones, the night sky a canopy of indifferent stars. What if we turned back? Patroclus once murmured, flames dancing in his gaze. Achilles paused, cup halfway to lips, the question hanging like smoke. But the answer lay unspoken in the embers. Glow the path had already begun its constriction. As victories mounted, so did the fractures. Agamemnon, proud and grasping, claimed Briseis as prize, her tears silent accusations as she was led away. Achilles' rage ignited slow, a fire banked but fierce. He confronted the king in the assembly, voice steady, words cutting deeper than blades. You take what is mine, yet hide behind lines when battle calls. The air thickened, warriors shifting uneasily, the rift opening like a wound. Agamemnon's retort was thunder, but Achilles withdrew to his tent, the decision crystallizing in that retreat. No more would he fight for a greedy lord. Let the Greeks falter, let Troy press. He sat by the sea, waves lapping at his feet, the rhythm a mirror to his thoughts. Patroclus watched from afar, concern etching his features, but said nothing. Silence stretched, days bleeding into one another, the war's din distant yet insistent. The Greeks suffered, ships burning under Trojan assault, heroes falling like felled oaks. Emissaries came, pleading, Odysseus with clever words, Ajax with brute honesty, Phoenix with paternal pleas. Return, Achilles. Fate awaits your hand. He listened, hearth fire casting long shadows, but his resolve held, a wall unbreached. Yet in the quiet hours, doubt crept like mist from the shore. Dreams visited, Thetis appearing ethereal, her voice a whisper of waves. The choice nears, my son. Glory or life, one devours the other. He woke to the sound of goals. The prophecy's weight pressing heavier, paths forking, but one growing dim. Tension built in the camp. Whispers of defeat circulating like currency. Hector's forces pushed, flames licking at hulls, the air acrid with smoke. Achilles paced his tent, spear idle, the inaction a torment greater than wounds. Patroclus approached at last, eyes imploring. Let me wear your armour, lead the Myrmidons. Turn the tide, if only for a breath. The request hung, a thread pulled taut. Achilles hesitated, the moment stretching, fate's fingers closing inch by inch. He nodded, reluctant. The armour transferred like a sacred rite. Patroclus departed, the camp stirring with renewed hope. But Achilles remained, gazing at the horizon where sea met sky, sensing the noose tighten ever so slightly. And in that parting glance, as Patroclus vanished into the fray, the first true shadow of inevitability fell, quiet, unannounced, but absolute. The battlefield stirred at dawn, a slow awakening of iron and breath. Patroclus moved at the head of the Myrmidons, Achilles' armour catching the first light like a second sun. The bronze plates shifted with his stride, familiar yet borrowed, the weight of another man's destiny settling on his shoulders. He did not speak of fear. He only tightened the chin strap and lifted the great ash spear. The men followed without question, their steps falling into the old rhythm they had learned under Achilles' eye. From the ridge above his tent, Achilles watched them go. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and smoke, and he stood motionless until the phalanx disappeared beyond the ditch and the stakes. The morning passed in measured silence. Achilles walked the shore alone, the waves drawing back and returning like breaths taken too long. He bent once, letting water run through his fingers, feeling the cold bite against skin that no blade could pierce. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries thin and distant. He listened for the sounds of battle, the bronze clash, the shouts, but the wind carried only fragments, muffled by distance and the pounding of his own blood. Hours gathered and folded into one another. He sat on a broken spar from a beached ship, elbows on knees, gaze fixed on the haze where land met sea. The sun climbed indifferent. Midday brought the first runners. A youth, helm lost, shield splintered, stumbled into camp gasping that the Trojans had recoiled, that Patroclus drove them like wind through dry grass. Cheers rose among the tents, but Achilles remained by the water, but turning the news over slowly, tasting its sweetness and its warning. Another messenger came as the light slanted gold. The Myrmidons still pressed forward, Patroclus unbroken at their centre. Achilles nodded once, the smallest motion, and returned to his vigil. The sea kept its counsel, lapping at the sand in endless repetition. Dusk began to gather when the rhythm changed. The distant roar of combat shifted, grew ragged. Achilles rose without thought, body responding before mind. He climbed the slight rise behind the ships, eyes straining toward the plain. Torches flickered along the Trojan wall, shadows lengthened across the field. Then came the sound, not the steady surge of advance, but a breaking wave, a retreat. Figures streamed back toward the ditch. Small at this distance, yet unmistakable in their haste. Achilles' hand tightened on the spear he had carried from the tent, though he had not meant to bring it. The runners arrived in ones and twos, faces streaked with dust and blood. They spoke in fragments. Patroclus had reached the very walls, had slain Sarpedon beneath the beech tree, had turned the day. But Hector waited, fresh and terrible, backed by Apollo's unseen hand. The god's presence hung in their words like mist, a blinding light, a sudden stripping away of strength. Patroclus had stood too long in the borrowed glory. Achilles listened without interrupting, each report settling deeper, cold as river stones dropped into still water. Night fell fully before the last truth arrived. They brought the body on a shield, borne by 4 myrmidons whose steps dragged with exhaustion. The armour was gone, stripped by Hector's hands, and Patroclus lay naked to the stars, skin pale where blood had ceased to flow. A single wound gaped beneath the ribs, but clean and final. They laid him on the ground before the tent, gentle as setting down something infinitely fragile. Achilles approached slowly, the sand cool beneath bare feet. He knelt. The firelight touched Patroclus' face, smoothing away the pain, restoring the quiet features he had known since boyhood on Pelion. No sound escaped Achilles at first. He reached out, fingers brushing the cold cheek, but tracing the line of jaw as if confirming memory. Then the silence broke, not with a roar, but with a low exhalation, almost a sigh, carrying the weight of every unspoken year. He gathered the body against his chest, armour forgotten, and rocked once, twice, the motion small and private. Around them the myrmidons stood in a loose ring, torches lowered, flames trembling in the breeze off the sea. No one spoke. The night held its breath. Later, when the fires burned low, Achilles rose. He walked to the water's edge again, but this time he did not sit. He stood ankle, deep in the surf, letting waves pull at his legs, staring across the dark expanse toward Troy. The city's watch, fires glimmered like malevolent eyes. Somewhere within those walls Hector wore the armour forged for Achilles by the god of fire himself. The thought settled without heat, only certainty, cold and clear as moonlight on bronze. He turned back toward the tent, where Patroclus waited, shrouded now in clean linen. The decision formed not in words, but in the set of his shoulders, the slow closing of a fist. Thetis came at midnight, rising from the depths like mist given form. She stood beside him on the sand, her touch cool as deep water. "My son," she whispered, the thread shortens. Achilles did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the shrouded figure visible through the open tent flap. "I know," he said, voice low, steady. "Let it shorten." Thetis reached as if to touch his arm, then let her hand fall. She lingered a moment longer, then sank back into the sea without another word, leaving only the faint scent of brine and sorrow. Achilles returned to the body. He sat beside it through the remaining hours of night, speaking softly. Memories of mountain hunts, of shared wine under Pelion's pines, of laughter that had once seemed endless. Dawn found him still there, eyes dry, face carved into new lines. When the first light touched the horizon, he rose and called for the armourers. The new panoply waited, brought long ago by Thetis, lighter, fiercer, etched with scenes of wrath and mourning. He donned it piece by piece, each buckle a vow. each strap a binding. The myrmidons gathered outside, silent, sensing the shift in the air. He stepped into the morning light, the bronze catching fire. The camp stirred around him, men falling in without command. Achilles looked once more toward the plain where Troy waited, then toward the sea that had carried him here, the paths that had once branched, long life in obscurity, quiet return to Phthia, lay withered behind him, trampled under the weight of this single night. Only one road remained, straight and narrow, leading through Hector's heart to whatever lay beyond. And as the sun cleared the hills, Achilles began to walk toward it, the sand giving way beneath feet that would not turn aside again. The plain lay open before him, pale gold under the rising sun, scattered with the debris of yesterday's fight. Achilles walked alone at first, the myrmidons forming behind him in measured ranks, shields locked, spears upright like a forest of ash. No trumpet sounded, no war cry yet. Only the steady tread of feet on dry earth and the faint clink of bronze. He did not look back. The sea wind followed at his heels, carrying the scent of salt and the memory of Patroclus, body cooling on the sand. At the edge of the Greek ditch he paused. The ground here was scarred, broken chariots, spent arrows, dark patches where blood had soaked in overnight. He stepped over a fallen shield, Trojan work, its blazon half obscured by dust. The gesture was small, almost absent, yet it marked the crossing from the world of waiting into the one of ending. The myrmidons flowed after him without a word. Across the field, the Trojan gates stood open, ranks pouring out to meet the new day. Hector was there, unmistakable even at distance, plume nodding, the stolen armour flashing with every movement. Achilles began to move faster, not running yet, but lengthening stride until the ground blurred beneath him. The myrmidons kept pace, breath steady, shields rhythmic. The space between armies narrowed like a drawn bowstring. When the first Trojan arrows arsed overhead, he did not raise his shield higher. He simply walked through their falling shadows. Some struck the earth around him, quivering. One glanced from the new grave with a clear ringing note. He felt nothing but the pull forward, a tide inside the blood. The lines met with a muted crash, more sigh than thunder. Spears crossed, shields ground together. Men leaned into one another like trees in wind. A chill passed through the press, as though it parted for him alone. He did not strike wildly. Each motion was deliberate, almost gentle, a thrust that found the gap beneath a raised arm, a downward cut that opened a throat before the man could cry out. Bodies folded around him, quiet in their falling. He stepped over them without breaking rhythm, eyes fixed on the single figure ahead. Hector saw him coming. The Trojan prince had been directing companies near the Scaean gate, voice carrying calm orders. Now he stilled, a hand tightening on the spear. The armour he wore, Achilles' own, caught the light differently on a different body. Plates shifting with unfamiliar breath. For a moment the two men stood apart from the swirl, regarding one another across 20 paces of trampled earth. Around them the battle continued, but slower, as though the air itself thickened. Hector moved first. He advanced steadily, shield forward, spear levelled. Achilles waited until the distance closed to 10 strides. then stepped aside, not hurried, almost courteous, and let the thrust pass harmlessly. In the same motion he struck, not at the body, but at the spear shaft, shearing it clean. The broken end fell between them. Hector drew his sword without hesitation, the blade his own, not borrowed. They circled once, slowly, dust rising in small puffs from their feet. The exchange began in silence. Sword met sword with clear bronze notes. No wasted strength. Hector fought with measured skill, footwork precise. Shield always angled to protect the heart. Achilles answered with economy, never overreaching, each parry flowing into counter. They knew one another's measure now, had known it, perhaps, since the day Hector took the armour from Patroclus a body. Sweat gathered on Hector's brow. Achilles felt only the steady drum of blood in his ears. A shift came gradual as dusk. Hector began to press harder, seeking an opening, breath growing shorter. Achilles gave ground by inches, drawing him away from the Trojan ranks, away from aid. The circle widened around them. Men of both sides stepped back without command, sensing the centre of the day. The sun climbed higher, heat rising from the plain in visible waves. Dust clung to skin, to bronze, to the drying blood. Hector lunged suddenly, blade high for a downward cut. Achilles caught it on his shield boss, the impact jarring up his arm like distant thunder. He twisted, hooking the sword edge, and wrenched. The blade flew from Hector's grip, spinning once before burying itself in earth. Hector did not retreat. He reached for the dagger at his belt, but the motion was too slow. Achilles' spear came forward, not thrown, but driven, point finding the small gap beneath the breastplate where Patroclus had once been pierced. The thrust was quiet. No shout, no exultation. Hector stiffened, eyes widening in brief surprise. He looked down at the ash shaft protruding from his side, then up at Achilles' face. Blood welled dark around the iron, spreading across the stolen bronze. His knees buckled slowly, as though he chose the moment to kneel. Achilles withdrew the spear with the same deliberate care he had used to drive it home. Hector sank to the dust, one hand pressed to the wound, the other reaching toward the walls of Troy, as if for balance. Achilles stood over him. The battle noise seemed far away now, muffled by the pounding in his own chest. Hector's breath came shallow, each exhale a soft rasp. He spoke once, voice low, almost conversational. "Return my body to my father." Achilles did not answer at once. He looked toward the city, where figures clustered on the battlements, Priam, perhaps, or Andromache, small at this distance, yet watching. Then he looked down again. "No," he said, the single word carrying no heat, only finality. He turned away. The Myrmidons closed in, silent. Achilles walked back through the field, spear trailing, leaving Hector where he fell. Behind him the Trojans began to waver, their line bending like a bow over, drawn. The Greeks pressed forward, sensing the break. But Achilles did not join them. He moved toward the river Scamander, whose waters glinted beyond the plain, seeking solitude in the heat of the day. At the riverbank he knelt and washed the blood from his hands. The current was cool, carrying flecks of bronze and dust downstream. He watched them go, small red threads unravelling in the flow. When he rose, the sun stood nearly overhead, shadows short and sharp. The victory was his, yet it tasted of ash. Somewhere behind him, Hector's body lay cooling under the same sun, armour gleaming falsely. And as he stood there, water dripping from his fingers, the first quiet certainty settled deeper. The thread had shortened again. Another length burned away in the taking of a life that could not restore the one already lost. The river Scamander flowed onward, its surface unbroken save for the occasional ripple from a drifting leaf. Achilles lingered at the bank longer than he intended, the water's murmur filling the space left by battle's hush. He rose at last, shaking droplets from his hands, and turned back toward the plain. The sun had passed its zenith. Shadows began to stretch eastward, pulling the day toward evening. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Greek and Trojan mingled in the dust, shields upturned like discarded shells. His myrmidons had gathered Hector's corpse, binding ankles and wrists with leather thongs, dragging it behind a chariot as he had commanded. No desecration yet, only the promise of it, hanging in the air like unshed rain. He mounted the chariot himself, reins loose in one hand, spear in the other. The horses sensed the change in him, nostrils flaring, ears flicking back, and leaned into the harness without urging. They circled the field slowly at first, the bound body bouncing over ruts, dust clouding around it. Achilles drove past the Greek lines, where men paused in their labours, eyes following the grim procession. Agamemnon watched from afar, arms folded, face unreadable. Odysseus leaned on his spear, gaze steady but silent. No one approached. The circuit widened. Chariot wheels carving twin furrows through the bloodied earth, each pass deliberate, a ritual marking the cost of defiance. By the ships, the Myrmidons had raised a pyre for Patroclus days before, though the ashes still smouldered faintly under a cairn of stones. Achilles halted the chariot there. He stepped down, gesturing once. 4 men lifted Hector's body, heavy now with the day's heat, and laid it at the pyre's base. Achilles drew his sword, not the one reforged by Hephaestus, but an older blade, plain and scarred from pillion hunts. He cut thongs free, then paused. The corpse lay face up, stolen armour, dulled by dust and gore, eyes half, open to the sky. Around it, the men waited, breaths held. He began with the head. Fingers worked methodically, unlacing the helm, lifting it away to reveal hair matted dark. 13 gashes followed, one for each day Patroclus a body had lain unavenged, but cuts shallow across arms, legs, chest, precise as a surgeon's marks. No haste, no fury displayed. Only the steady rhythm of blade on flesh, blood welling anew in thin lines. The Myrmidons shifted foot to foot, some turning eyes aside, but none spoke. When the last cut traced the jawline, Achilles sheathed the blade. He pierced the heels then, threading leather through tendon and bone, binding ankles tight. The body arched slightly in the pull, a final spasm denied. Back in the chariot, he drove to the shore. Waves lapped higher now with the tide's turn, foam reaching nearly to the wheels. He dragged the corpse the final distance himself, muscles straining under the dead weight, sand dragging furrows behind. At water's edge, he hurled it into the shallows. The current caught it sluggishly, rolling it once, twice, before carrying it seaward. Gulls descended, white wings stark against the bronze, pecking at eyes and wounds. Achilles watched until the form blurred into the haze, then turned inland. Night gathered fully as he reached camp, fires kindling one by one, stars pricking the dome above. Sleep evaded him. He lay in the tent, armour stacked nearby. The air thick with brine and smoke. Visions came unbidden, Patroclus laughing on the mountain, Hector's last gaze, the river's untroubled flow. Dawn brought no relief. Hermes arrived at first light, shadow slipping through the Greek watch unseen. He stood at the tent flap, form shimmering like heat haze. Priam comes, the god murmured, voice neither warning nor command. Under truce, for his son. Achilles nodded once, unsurprised. Fate's hand moved now through others, drawing threads tighter. The old king arrived at dusk the next day, alone save for the god's invisible escort. His chariot creaked to a halt beyond the ditch, white mules stamping softly. Priam descended, bent and trembling, yet steps firm across the scarred ground. Achilles waited outside the tent, unmoving, a firelight carving his shadow long. No guards flanked him, the Myrmidons stood distant, spears grounded. Priam approached haltingly, eyes fixed on the earth until the final paces. Then he knelt, slow as age demanded, forehead touching dust before the warrior's feet. "Ransom, my son," the king said, voice cracked but steady. He gestured to the wagon, laden with treasure, gold, bronze, fine linens. The weighing scale balanced against Hector's worth. Achilles regarded him in silence, the fire popping between them. Priam's face bore the lines of Troy's unyielding walls, grief etched deeper than any siege. Something stirred then, not pity, but recognition father to father, man to man across the abyss. Achilles rose, extending a hand. Priam took it, pulled upright, bones fragile under callosed grip. They entered the tent. Achilles uncovered Hector's body, washed clean now by Scamander's reclaiming. Wounds closed in death's pallor. Priam touched the cold shoulder once, a sob escaping unbidden. No words passed at first, only the shared labour of lifting, wrapping in linens, loading onto the cart. Outside, under torchlight, Achilles poured libation, wine dark as blood, over the bier. "Eat," he said then, gesturing to bread and meat by the fire. Priam obeyed, hands shaking, the act binding truce deeper than oaths. They sat through the night, speaking little. Priam of Andromache's vigil, Astyanax's cries, Achilles of Patroclus at Pyre, the long voyage from Phaeacia. Dawn neared when the king mounted to leave, Hector's body secured behind. Achilles watched the chariot recede, mule's hooves soft on sand, until it vanished among the ships. The truce held fragile, a breath between storms. He returned to the tent, weariness settling at last. But sleep brought no peace, only the river's whisper, calling him onward. Days passed in watchful rhythm. The Greeks raided outward, testing Troy's weakened gates, but Achilles held back, spear idle. Messengers came from Agamemnon, honeyed words of alliance renewed, spoils offered. He listened, dismissed them with a gesture. The army whispered of his mercy to Priam, of God's favour turning. Yet in the quiet hours, he felt the noose draw closer, not from enemies, but from within the fire of vengeance banked, yet embers glowing, demanding fuel. Scouts reported movement at last, Trojan sorties probing the flanks, Amazon allies glimpsed on the horizon. Achilles sharpened his spear anew. The stone's rasp meditative. Patroclus a shade seemed to linger in the scrape, urging, waiting. The camp stirred with purpose, men oiling shields, checking straps. He donned armour at midday, each piece heavier now with accumulated days. As he stepped into the sun, the plain stretched empty before him. Troy's walls distant, but nearer in his blood's pull, and in that readiness the paths converged further, every step echoing the single choice that had set this course unyielding. The Amazons came at the turning of the moon, their hoofbeats a low thunder rolling across the plain from the north. Penthesilea led them, tall on a black mare, hair unbound and catching the wind like a banner of night. 12 companies followed, shields rimmed in silver, bows slung across backs. Troy's gates opened briefly to receive them, and the city's watch, fires burned brighter that night, fed by fresh hope. From the Greek camp the movement was watched in silence. Men sharpened spears and tightened straps, sensing the war lengthening again, like a shadow stretching toward evening. Achilles heard the news at dawn, brought by a scout whose breath still steamed in the cool air. He nodded once, said nothing, and walked to the shore. The sea lay flat and grey, reflecting the sky's indecision. He stood there until the sun cleared the hills behind him, then returned to his tent and began to arm. The motions were unhurried, graves buckled. Kyras lifted over the head with the soft rasp of linen beneath bronze. The great shield slung across his back. Each piece settled into place as though it had waited years for this day. When he stepped outside, the Myrmidons were already formed, silent, ready. The armies met midway on the plain, where the ground rose slightly into a low ridge, scarred by old wheel ruts. Dust hung in the air before a blow was struck, raised by the slow advance of both lines. Achilles walked ahead of his phalanx, alone for the first 20 paces, but spear balanced across his shoulder. Across the field Penthesilea dismounted, handing reins to an attendant. She came forward on foot, bow unstrung, a long spear in her right hand. The space between them narrowed to the length of a thrown stone. They regarded one another without haste. She was taller than most men, eyes dark, and steady beneath the rim of her helm. A scar crossed her left cheek, pale against sun, brown skin. Achilles noted the way she planted her feet, weight balanced, ready to spring either forward or aside. No words passed. Around them the armies stilled, shields lowered slightly, breaths held. Even the wind seemed to pause. She moved first, a sudden forward glide, spear thrusting low for the thigh. Achilles shifted weight, letting the point pass, then stepped inside the reach and struck with the butt of his own spear against her shield rim. The bronze rang clear. She spun away, recovering balance with the grace of long practice, and loosed a backhand, cut aimed at his neck. He ducked beneath it, felt the wind of the passage across his crest, and answered with a thrust that grazed the edge of her corselet. Leather parted, a thin line of blood appeared, a bright against the dark hide. The exchange flowed without pause, a conversation in motion and iron. She was swift, turning each parry into attack, forcing him to circle. He gave ground by measured inches, drawing her farther from her line, away from the reach of Amazon bows. Sweat gathered beneath his helm, trickling down the spine. Her breath came steady, still, eyes never leaving his. Once she fainted high and drove low. He caught the spear on his shield, twisted, nearly wrenched it free. She released and drew the short axe at her belt in the same heartbeat, closing to grapple. They locked for a moment, shield against shield, faces close enough to feel each other's breath. Strength met strength, hers coiled and fierce, his deeper, unyielding. Slowly he bore her backward, heel digging into dust, until her balance tipped. She broke away with a twist, axe flashing in a short arc that rang against his helm and set his ears singing. He answered with the spear's edge, a downward cut that found the join at her shoulder. Bronze-parted flesh, blood welled warm across his knuckles. She staggered once, but did not fall. Eyes blazed brighter, a fierce joy in them, as though pain were welcome confirmation of life. She lunged again, axe high, spear discarded. Achilles stepped inside the swing, caught her wrist, turned. The axe flew wide. In the same motion, he drove his spear upward beneath the ribs. The point entered clean, grating briefly on bone, before finding the heart. She stiffened, mouth opening in a silent gasp. For an instant they stood locked, her weight leaning into him, eyes searching his face as though memorizing it. He lowered her slowly, spear withdrawn with care. She sank to her knees, then forward, forehead touching the dust. Blood pooled dark beneath her, soaking into the thirsty earth. Achilles remained kneeling a moment longer, hand still on her shoulder, feeling the last tremor pass through muscle and bone. Around them the Amazons wavered, a low moan rising from their ranks. The Greek stood silent, awed by the brevity and the grace of it. He rose at last, wiping the spear on a fold of his cloak. The Amazon line broke then, not in rout but in sorrow, riders wheeling away toward the river. Achilles did not pursue. He turned back toward the Greek lines, walking slowly, the ridge empty behind him save for the single figure cooling in the dust. The sun stood high now, heat shimmering above the plain. Blood dried stiff on his hands, flaking in the wind. That night the pyre for Penthesilea burned beyond the Greek ditch, built by her own women under truce. Flames rose straight and pale against the stars. Achilles watched from a distance, unmoving, until the fire sank to embers. Sleep came fitful, dreams threaded with the clash of bronze, and the weight of bodies falling. Dawn brought new riders on the horizon, Ethiopians this time, dark-skinned, tall shields painted with sunbursts. Memnon led them, son of the dawn, armour gleaming gold. Achilles armed again, the ritual unchanged. The plain waited, patient as ever, ready to receive more blood. Each victory shortened the thread further, not by days but by breaths. He felt it now, a quiet certainty beneath the heart every foe felled brought the final arrow nearer. Yet he walked forward, spear in hand, the myrmidons falling in behind like shadows lengthening toward dusk. And as the armies closed once more, the space for turning aside grew thinner still, a single path gleaming bright and inescapable beneath the indifferent sun. Memnon came with the dawn itself, as though the goddess Use had opened her gates and poured her sun onto the plain. His Ethiopians moved in dark ranks, shields broad and bright with gold, spears long as young saplings. The air carried a new scent. Dry grass from distant lands, horse sweat, the faint sweetness of southern resins. Achilles watched from the rise above the ships, helm tucked beneath his arm, hair stirring in the early breeze. The enemy formed slowly, deliberately, giving time for the sun to climb and geld their armour. Memnon rode a white chariot, reins light in his hands, crest of red horsehair streaming like spilled blood. The Greeks advanced without haste. No songs rose, no boasts. Only the measured tread of thousands, the soft creak of leather, the occasional clink of bronze on bronze. Achilles walked at the centre, spear balanced, shield slung loose. He felt the day's heat already gathering beneath the cuirass, pressing against skin. The plain stretched wide and empty between the armies, a space waiting to be filled with motion and ending. They met near the Simois ford, where shallow water glinted over rounded stones. Memnon descended from his chariot, handing the reins away with a calm gesture. He came forward alone, as Penthesilea had, yet different, taller, broader. Movements carrying the weight of distant rivers and endless horizons. His armour was worked with scenes of lions and sunrise, gold inlaid upon dark bronze. Achilles stopped 10 paces away. Dust settled around their feet. Neither spoke. The armies behind them quieted, as though the plain itself listened. Memnon struck first, a long overhand thrust meant to drive through shield and body together. Achilles turned it aside with the rim of his own shield, the impact jarring up his arm like a hammer on anvil. He answered low, spear point seeking the thigh above the grave. Memnon shifted, caught the thrust on his shield boss, and riposted with a short, vicious cut that rang against Achilles' helm and set sparks flying. They circled, slow at first, testing reach and timing. The rhythm built gradually. Memnon fought with patience, each strike measured, conserving strength beneath the climbing sun. Achilles pressed closer, shortening the distance, forcing the Ethiopian to give ground step by step toward the river. Sweat traced paths through the dust on both faces. Breath came deeper, more deliberate. Once Memnon feinted withdrawal and spun suddenly, spear whipping in a wide arc aimed at the neck. Achilles dropped beneath it, felt the wind stir his crest, and drove upward into the exposed side. The point grated on bronze, found a seam, parted mail rings. Blood-welled, dark against gold. Memnon did not flinch. He closed instead, shield slamming forward to unbalance. Spear discarded for a short, sword drawn in the same motion. They grappled at close quarters now, bronze grinding, feet sliding for purchase in the dust. Strength met strength, Memnon's deep and enduring, Achilles' swift and unyielding. For long moments neither gained. Locked in a slow-turning dance, while the sun burned higher and the river murmured behind them. Achilles felt the moment shift, subtle as a change in tide. Memnon's breath shortened. A faint tremor passed through the arm locked against his shield. He twisted suddenly, breaking the grapple, stepped back 1 pace, and thrust, not high for the throat, but low, beneath the raised guard. The spear entered just below the breastplate's lower edge, driving upward. Memnon stiffened, eyes widening. The sword slipped from his fingers, ringing softly on a stone. He looked down at the ash shaft, then up at Achilles' face, surprise giving way to something quieter Acceptance, perhaps, or recognition. Achilles withdrew the spear slowly. Memnon sank to his knees, hands pressing the wound, as though to hold life in place. Blood pulsed between his fingers, bright in the sunlight. He remained upright a moment longer, gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the dawn had come from, then folded forward gently, forehead touching the earth. The Ethiopians stood motionless behind him, shields lowered, the plain suddenly vast and silent. Achilles lingered, only long enough to close the dead man's eyes with 2 fingers. Then he turned and walked back through the Greek ranks. No pursuit followed. The Ethiopians withdrew in good order, carrying their king's body toward the river to wash and prepare. The sun stood nearly overhead now, heat shimmering above the dust. Achilles felt it on his neck, on the drying blood across his knuckles. Victory again, yet thinner each time, like a blade honed too often. That evening the pyre for Memnon burned on the far bank, flames pale against the darkening sky. Achilles watched from the Greek side, unmoving, until the fire sank to coals carried away by wind. Sleep came heavy, dreamless for once. Dawn brought no new allies to Troy's gates. The walls stood quieter, watch, fires fewer. The siege settled into waiting, a long breath held. Days passed in small motions, sharpening spears, mending shields, walking the shore at twilight. The sea remained unchanged, waves drawing back and returning with the same indifferent rhythm. Achilles felt the thread now not as shortening, but as drawn taut, vibrating beneath the skin. The prophecy no longer whispered. It simply was, a constant pressure behind the eyes. Scouts reported movement at last. A single figure approaching under a green branch. Paris with his bow, Apollo's favour heavy upon him. Achilles armed without hurry, the ritual familiar now to the point of stillness. As he stepped onto the plain once more, the walls of Troy loomed closer in feeling than in sight, the final narrowing complete. And in the quiet before the arrow flew, he understood that every path had long since converged into this one stride forward, inevitable as the tide returning to shore. The plain lay quiet under a pale morning sky, the wind carrying only the faint cry of gulls from the distant shore. Achilles walked alone toward the Scaean gate, spear in hand, shield slung across his back. No Myrmidons followed this time. He had dismissed them with a single gesture at dawn. The Greek camp watched from afar, figures small against the ships, silent as stones. Troy's walls rose ahead, battlements lined with watchers, helmets glinting, bows unstrung but ready. Paris stood among them, slender beside the taller figures of his brothers. The great bow of Pandarus across his shoulder. Achilles halted beyond arrow range, planted his spear butt in the dust, and waited. The gesture was simple, almost courteous. Come, if you will. Minutes passed in stillness. A gate creaked open, small at first, then wider. Paris stepped through alone, quiver at hip, bow strung now. He walked slowly, sandals raising small puffs of dust, until the distance closed to 100 paces. There he stopped. The wind stirred his hair, the same wind that tugged at Achilles' crest. Neither man spoke. Paris knocked an arrow with deliberate care, drawing the string to his cheek. The bow was fine work, yew and horn layered smooth. He loosed without flourish. The shaft asked high, a dark line against the sky, then fell. Achilles shifted weight once. The arrow struck the earth at his feet, quivering. Paris knocked again, faster this time, loosing in steady rhythm. 3 arrows, 4, 5, each falling closer, yet none finding flesh. Achilles did not raise his shield. He simply watched, unmoving, as though measuring the wind itself. Paris paused, breath visible in the cool air. He reached for another shaft, but his fingers hesitated over the fletching. From the battlements a murmur rose, faint as distant surf. Then the air changed, subtle, like the hush before thunder. Achilles felt it first as pressure behind the eyes, a warmth along the spine. Apollo's presence settled over the plain, unseen yet absolute, guiding the hand that drew the bow. Paris loosed once more. The arrow flew straighter, lower, guided now by more than mortal skill. It struck just below the grave, above the heel's rise, the one place untouched by Styx's water. Pain bloomed sudden and bright, a white fire racing up the leg. Achilles staggered half a step, surprise more than agony in his eyes. He looked down at the shaft protruding from tendon and bone, blood welling dark around the iron head. Paris stood frozen, bow lowered, face pale beneath the morning light. Achilles took one more step forward, then another, spear dragging now, but carving a shallow furrow in the dust. The walls of Troy blurred at the edges of sight. He felt the ground tilt gently, as though the plain itself were a ship easing into harbour. Strength ebbed not in a rush, but slowly, like sand through a narrowed glass. He sank to one knee, spear butt planted to hold him upright. Blood pooled warm beneath the grave, soaking into the thirsty earth. Paris turned and walked back toward the gate. Steps hurried now, disappearing within the shadow of the walls. The gate closed with a soft thud, final as a door shutting on childhood. Achilles remained alone on the plain, the wind strengthening, carrying the scent of salt and distant pine from Pelion. He looked toward the Greek ships, small now, toys beached on sand. Figures ran from the camp, Ajax, Odysseus, the Myrmidons, but they moved slowly, as though through deep water. He thought of Patroclus waiting by the pyre's ashes, of Thetis rising from the waves, of Chiron's voice rumbling under mountain stars. The memories came not in flashes, but gently, like waves returning to shore. The spear slipped from his fingers, falling with a muted clank. He leaned forward, forehead resting against the shield rim, breath shallow but steady. Pain receded to a distant pulse, no longer urgent. The runners reached him at last, Ajax roaring grief, Odysseus silent, hands reaching to lift. Achilles raised one arm, a small motion asking pause. He looked once more toward Troy, walls solid and enduring under the climbing sun, then toward the sea beyond the ships, endless and unchanged. A quiet acceptance settled over him, not resignation, but completion. The thread had reached its end, not snapped, but tied neatly, irrevocably. He let them carry him then, back across the plain he had walked so many times. The dust closed over his blood, the wind erasing the furrow of his spear. Behind him the gate of Troy remained shut. Before him the ships waited to bear him home, not to Phthia's fields, but to the long shade where heroes rest. And, as the light softened around his closing eyes, the moment that had sealed everything felt less like a wound than a door. Gently opened at last. They carried him back across the plain on a shield borne by Ajax and Odysseus, the bronze dented and darkened with use. His weight settled heavy in the centre, arms folded across the breastplate as though in sleep. The Myrmidons walked beside, spears reversed, crests bowed. No one spoke. The wind followed them, gentle now, lifting fine dust from the furrows and letting it drift seaward. Troy's walls receded behind, gates closed, watchers diminished to specks on the battlements. The sun climbed toward noon, indifferent to the procession, threading its slow way home. At the camp they laid him beneath a simple awning near the ships. Armour was removed piece by piece, greaves unbuckled, cuirass lifted away. The great shield leaned against a spar. The arrow remained in the heel, shaft snapped short to ease the carrying. Blood had ceased to flow. Only a dark stain spread across the linen beneath. Warriors gathered in loose rings, faces turned inward, eyes reflecting the quiet fire kindled nearby. Agamemnon came last, cloak drawn close, and stood at the edge without entering the circle. Even he said nothing. Thetis rose from the sea at dusk, water streaming from her hair, like liquid starlight. She moved through the camp, unseen by mortal eyes, until she reached the awning. There she knelt, her hands hovering above the still form, not quite touching. Nereids followed in her wake, pale figures emerging from the surf. Voices low in an ancient lament that carried over the waves. The Greeks felt it as a chill along the spine, a salt wind bearing sorrow older than their war. Thetis bent at last and pressed her lips to the cold forehead, a mother's farewell without tears. Tears belonged to the living. Night deepened. Fires burned low along the beach, casting long shadows across the sand. Odysseus sat apart, sharpening a knife he did not need, gaze fixed on the dark line of Troy. Ajax stood vigil nearer the body, unmoving, a pillar against the stars. The Myrmidons kept their own watch, small groups speaking softly of Pylian hunts, of shared wine, of laughter that would not come again. No boasts now, no recounting of deeds, only the quiet naming of moments that had once seemed endless. Preparations began before dawn. The pyre rose high on the strand, olive wood and pine, layered with fleeces and dark honey, fragrant herbs scattered between. They washed the body with clear water drawn from the Samois, anointed it with oil, dressed it in clean linen. The broken arrow was drawn at last, the wound closed with a fold of cloth. Armour was placed beside, not upon him. Hephaestus' work returned to the earth that had borne it. At sunrise they lifted him onto the bier, gentle as setting a child to rest. The flame caught slowly, fed by a steady onshore breeze. Smoke rose straight and pale, carrying sparks upward into the brightening sky. Captives were led forward, 12 young Trojans, throats cut without cruelty, blood poured as offering. Horses followed, manes cropped, hooves stilled forever. The fire accepted all, crackling softly, consuming with patient hunger. Thetis stood nearest the heat, form shimmering, eyes reflecting the heart of the blaze. Around her the Nereids circled in slow dance, voices weaving a thread of sound that held grief and honour in equal measure. Hours passed. The sun crossed its arc and began to descend. The pyre settled into glowing coals, bones whitening within. When only ashes remained, the myrmidons gathered them carefully, gold urn prepared, 2 handles, the work of divine hands. Thetis received it last, cradling the weight against her breast. She turned toward the sea, and the Nereids followed, fading step by step into the surf until only ripples marked their passing. The urn vanished with them beneath the waves, carried to depths where no mortal foot trades. The camp stirred then, slowly, as though waking from long dream. Ships were provisioned, sails mended, oars counted. Agamemnon gave orders in a subdued voice. Even his pride bent beneath the day's weight. Odysseus walked the shore alone, casting pebbles into the water, watching circles widen and fade. Ajax lingered by the cooled ashes longest, scattering a final handful of sand across them before turning away. Wind filled the sails at evening. The fleet drew away from the Trojan shore, prows turning westward. Behind them the plain lay empty, Troy's walls enduring under a quiet sky. The war would end soon. Others would finish what one man's choice had shaped, but that ending belonged to different voices. For Achilles, the thread had completed its weave brief, bright, unbreakable, and somewhere beneath the wine, dark sea, in halls of coral and shadow, the urn rested, undisturbed. Waves moved above in eternal rhythm, drawing back and returning, carrying the faint echo of a name once spoken in prophecy and now fulfilled. The gods watched, silent at last. The world turned onward, heavier by one absence, lighter by one legend sealed forever. Thus fate closed around him, not with thunder, but with the soft hush of waves accepting their own.